Joining me now is Hollie McKay, war correspondent and author of Only Cry for the Living. Hollie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Last week, a White House review of the chaotic 2021 U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan pinned the blame on the Trump administration for a lack of planning. What do you think of that assessment?
Well, I was really disappointed when I heard that assessment, but also not surprised because it is politics. But, um, unless we look at what went wrong and take some accountability and responsibility for it, then we never really learn. So I was disappointed to kind of see that the buck was being passed and there was no accountability taken by the administration when they were the people in office. President Biden is and was at that point the commander in chief. And so what happened in Afghanistan, perhaps there was planning problems with the Trump administration, but at the end of the day, the Biden administration are the ones who executed those plans and need to take some responsibility for the absolute failure that evacuation really was.
It sounds like you're saying this isn't really an accurate account of what happened. It's more revisionist history. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, it's playing the political game. It's refusing to admit fault for anything, and it's always the person on the other side's fault, which is pretty much what we see in politics across the board these days, unfortunately. And many lives were lost in that evacuation, and I think that is deeply insulting to the Marines who lost their lives, and also more than 180 Afghans also lost their lives in that evacuation process. And so I think, not sort of taking any accountability or having no regrets for what happened is really quite insulting.
I do want to take a step back here, and you actually were in Afghanistan in the summer of 2021. So, can you tell us what your experience was like?
So I moved back to Afghanistan, and that was in June, I believe, June, July of 2021. And I remember sort of getting there and just sort of being fascinated by how quickly and rapidly the Taliban were taking over these provinces, but how little planning that there was by the US-backed Kabul government at that point. You would go to the park and there would just be people that were fleeing from other provinces where there was heavy fighting and Taliban takeover and no resources for them, sort of no forward thinking. And maybe we need to get shelters. Maybe we need to somehow set up a food bank for these people. There was just sort of absolutely nothing. And there seemed to be this collective denial that anything was really going to happen. And everywhere I went, the soldiers on different bases were convincing me that it was going to be fine, that there was not going to be any imminent fall of the government. And really, even the intelligence that I was receiving from the Kabul side really painted that same strange picture too. But when you looked at it from a practical standpoint, it was very clear that the country was falling apart. And I think a real signal of that to me was about a week before the fall. I went past a base and I remember just seeing these soldiers with their weapons and they were running and leaving. And I looked at them and I said, "Where are you going?" And they said, "We're leaving. We've had enough. We're going home." I said, "So you're not coming back to fight?" And they said, "No." And you just started to see that more and more rapidly as it sort of got closer to that fall. And then I was in the northern city of Mazar Sharif, which is about sort of a 12-hour drive from Kabul. It's up near the Uzbekistan border when that fell, and that fell the day before Kabul. And again, the night before, I'd been out with commandos who were convincing me that there was absolutely no way that they were going to leave their post, that they were going to fight to the end. And the same commandos that I spoke to as everything was falling the next day, they were all sort of on the run trying to get to different border areas. So it just fell apart very, very quickly. And even as it was sort of falling apart, again, intelligence people in Kabul were telling me, "Oh, it's fine. It's going to hold for at least a couple more days. You'll be able to get back," which of course wasn't the case. So you can see there was just this vacuum of information and so many inaccurate things that were being passed around that you really couldn't rely on any information that was coming.
It sounds like the writing on the wall was really there, but I'm really curious. Do you think those commandos were lying to you, or did they think, hey, I'm actually going to stay and fight? And then, once things started shifting, they changed their minds?
Yeah, I think, and I do feel for him. The commandos really weathered a lot of that fight for many years in Afghanistan. But a lot of these soldiers were really sold out by their leadership. So what happened was and often a lot of the fighting, was more about having tea and talking rather than, huge amounts of bomb blasts. And when they came into Mazar, there was absolutely sort of no fight back. So a lot of it was really just about talking, and the Taliban was very good at being able to negotiate strategies with local warlords, and also with the leaders of the different A&A units. And so what happened was the leaders and sort of the top brass, they were given this kind of heads up. Okay, well, we'll make an agreement. We'll allow the Taliban to come in. They'll allow us safe passage out first, or there'll be some sort of negotiation. So a lot of the time, these foot soldiers are really just left to the slaughter. And so I know in the case of the commandos, when they realized that their leaders had all left, and that, General Dostum, who was the one who invited me to the Tsar, who was a sort of a very prominent warlord, he'd also left. And mind you, these soldiers were not given the heads up. They were basically out on the front lines and then realized that they basically been sold out. So at that point, of course, the morale drops, and then it's sort of this collective decision to you stay and fight and likely die, or you try to save your own life. And that's really where that self-preservation kicks in, and they run to wherever they think is the safest point.